Hey guys, it's Ollie from Rad Season. Welcome to the Rad Season show. I'm super excited to be joined today by Emmy Award-winning action sports producer and director Paul Taublieb. Paul, thanks for coming on the show. How are you?
Nice to talk to you. Thank you. Very excited to be here.
Good stuff. And you're over in Malibu at the moment, is that right?
I'm actually in Point Dume, Malibu, a little oasis of good waves and nice little community, northern Malibu.
Nice. And it's been really good at the moment. I mean, with all the swell and
it's really been pumping. It was, this place is a little sensitive with angle and whatnot, and it's been really good. I have to say, very consistent and super fun.
Nice one. And how long have you been over there? Because you're originally from New York, aren't you?
I'm still a New Yorker. I still see myself as a New Yorker, and people who talk to me still say I kind of the New York DNA hasn't left me by any means. But yeah, I've been out here about 25 years now.
Okay. And where did I'm curious to like where did the surfing bug come from? Like how did that all begin?
Well, everything I've done in my career, for whatever it's worth, all stems from surfing. And it's a little bit of a funny story. My parents, when I was a young kid, took me to see the movie The Endless Summer. And there I am, a little kid, I don't know, 8, 9 years old. And I was a swimmer at that point, competitive swimmer, dreamed of, going to the Olympics or whatever. And I always thought, part of me was like, this ability to go back and forth, not super fast, but I wasn't great swimming, that it seems sort of pointless and sort of Dadaistic that you just go back and forth in a pool and never get anywhere. And it just weighed on my mind, even as a young kid, the Sisyphean effort that was involved that didn't really have a lot of pleasure. And at the end of the day, you ended up where you started. And then I saw the movie and I thought, well, I'm a little kid and my dad has a boring job. He's an accountant. My mother sells insurance. And these grown-ups, I thought the guys in the movie were the equivalent to my parents. They travel around the world and see these cool things and they ride waves. I want to do that. And we went to, and this is pre-internet, so seeing these exotic locations, pre-cable TV. Mm-hmm. So, seeing Africa and even Hawaii was all exotic and crazy. So I convinced my parents to take me to a little beach called Gilgo Beach in New York, which is sort of this little Malibu-esque or New York's version of it. People hanging around on the beach with straw hats and pretending to build fake San Clemente thatched huts type thing. And I went and rode a few waves. And I thought, this is what I was too young to understand that it didn't appear to be a career path. And here's my father who had worked his way out of Brooklyn. We had Holocaust victims in our family, very traditional Jewish Long Island, the graduate sort of world that I grew up with on the Great Neck, Long Island. It's well known in that part of the world, a suburb of New York City. And I just the feeling was unbelievable, the uniqueness of it, the thrill of it. And then it just felt, wow, I can swim, meaning I could paddle and I was fairly in decent shape. It seemed like this is my purpose, to go do this thing, not realizing that it sort of wasn't a business, but of course it became one. It really became the foundation of everything I've done. So that's how I got started, just, in the beach. And for many years, my parents were very upset that they ever took me to see the movie till later on when they saw that it actually led to an actual business. Because in those days, very much unlike today, surfing was considered a degenerate, drug-infested thing. And, you're going to go to jail, your life's going to be ruined, and so on and so forth. It wasn't the way it is now. There was no industry. It just seemed like a pointless activity. And really, truly countercultural at the time. So that's how I got started. And then once I did it, I was also sort of a literary type. I used to read books and write poetry. And I was reading Surfing Magazine. And I wrote a letter to Dave Gilovich, who is still an icon in the industry. He runs all the content for Surfline. Mm-hmm. And this is many, many years ago. I mean, I'm talking decades. And I said, I want to write an article. And I wrote, an article about New York surfing. And that began my career as a writer, which led to all the journalism we went on to do. And started Surfing Magazine.
Was that in high school when you kind of
was in high school? Yeah.
Guys? Okay.
Yeah. And because New York's certainly not the epicenter of surfing. It's big now, but in those days it was really an outpost. It wasn't. The world was not the way it is today. So they were sort of grateful to have somebody who apparently could put the semblance of a sentence together, writing out of New York, because there wasn't a pool of people. And we had a famous surfer there named Ricky Rasmussen. So there was who went on to have a very sordid end of his life, murdered in Harlem, but U.S. champion. Project I may be looking into, and in fact, I'm working on things relating to that. It's early in development. So there was sort of a little bit of a star power. Ricky started in different TV shows and early surf movies, and then went on to, like I said, so anyway, that's how I got involved.
And so then, when did the filming and the sort of the like taking it from journalism and from writing and then sort of putting it on film, was that like an exercise? It was like a sort of surfing exercise video. I heard that you were kind of.
What actually happened was, it was sort of like that, but I'm a little bit of a practical person. So the home video, when VHS came along, most new entertainment technology begins with pornography, right? That's who drives early adapters, because there's a fanaticism to it. And I guess we'll leave it at that. And so that's what happened with video, home video. The old VCRs was that. Mm-hmm. But I was fascinated by VCRs because we used to have to wait for surf movies to come with 4 walls, right, into the VFW hall. You'd go see 5 summer stories on a big screen. Yeah. But then video came along, and now I could buy these videos for $70 and watch it at home. And I thought, wow, this is going to catch on. I really did have a sense that this idea of home video, manipulating your media for yourself, was going to be a big deal. And I was working at Us Magazine at the time. So I became very familiar with the home video industry. I started writing. I wrote the first column about home video in any consumer magazine. They were trade magazines, and I worked that out. And then I thought I wanted to make my own videos. And at that time, again, surfing was not what it is today. There was no, there wasn't even, maybe not a pro tour. I'm not quite sure. If it wasn't commercial. Yeah. So, but I was doing a self version of sports specific training because I lived in Manhattan. I couldn't get in the ocean that often. So, but I would work out. And at first I found, well, though I'm training, I still can't surf very well. Didn't make sense. There wasn't the sophistication of exercise like there is today. So I developed an exercise program for surfing. Then I thought, well, I'll apply this to another sport. And we came up with tennis. And we did a tennis video called Tennis Workout to Win. And theoretically, it was going to be a series of how to train for specific sports. And it didn't really work financially, but I learned how to make a video. I found investors. I understood the industry. And today there's all kinds of surfing training programs available, but then nobody would have been a ridiculous concept. And we shot it. So that's got me into video. And I found writing is a solitary profession, even if you're at a magazine like I was. And I wrote for the Washington Post and the Village Voice, and I continued to write for Surfer Magazine. But, you sit in a room, the windows are down, and you spend hours and hours. And writing is a very difficult thing to do it at a high level. And I had a certain amount of ability, but not a masterful ability as a writer. And I missed interaction with people. And when I discovered video production and directing, it's really collaborative. And I love that process of different people. This guy's an editor, this guy's a lighting guy, so on and so forth, bringing it together, the business side, all driven with a story basis. And before we started, we had a little conversation, and you asked, how did I get involved and how do all these disparate things link together? And all is very simple. It's about a story. If you can tell a good story in some fashion, you can apply it in many ways. And that includes live events. If you think of it as a story, not as a functionality event, you then create a story in the live event. And that sort of one thing led to another from there. And
was that then? Were you freelancing and sort of you were sort of writing, or were you going to an office every day, or were you writing at home?
In the early days, I worked at Us Magazine as a full-time senior editor, and I was the one person who did the non-celebrity stuff. I did some investigative reporting. I investigated on cults, and I was the one little feature editor and writer. They wanted someone, so that was great because I had kind of free reign to do a story about snake handlers and cult leaders and drug dealers and just sort of fascinating characters. And they were just happy to let me go off while they did the dynasty stories and everything else. They wanted one non-celebrity piece, so it was pretty wonderful that I got to do that for a few years with great editors in an unusual setting. But again, eventually I became a producer. Then I got involved through different people that I was working with ESPN. Mm-hmm. And I also was a consultant and a part owner on the board of directors of a company called Video Action Sports, which your older viewers will remember. And they were the only company distributing action sports, or in those days, extreme sports videos. So if you made a surf video or skate video, they were the only real distributor out there. There were a couple of smaller ones. And because of my relationship with ESPN, a guy called me and said, I see you have this catalog of all these videos, snowboarding, surfing, everything you see in action sports. How do we move this to ESPN2? We want to acquire the content. And I said to him, well, wait a second. What if you took the sports and did it as a live event? And that was the birth of the X Games, which I sort of blurted out without really thinking it through. And he goes, oh, so like in the Olympics of action sports, we could do all these sports. So he said, yes. So my attempt to migrate the content from home video VHS tapes to television, which seems fairly easy idea because they needed a lot of content, turned out really not to work well because the producers are so flaky. They didn't really have, or all the music was stolen in those days. Nobody cared. The labels didn't care. So you had the Rolling Stones and all these great bands, and you'd go back to these guys. Can you recut your video with all new music? It's no small matter, even in the best of circumstances. Yeah. But what did come out of it was a guy named Ron Semio said, I like your idea, write it up. And so that became, I was hired as a consultant, and I wrote an 88-page document about the world of then called extreme sports, about every single possible sport that could be in this new entity which was being formed, which then became Extreme Games and the X Games. So, a page on skateboarding and a page on skydiving. And he said, well, I want you to write about round the world sailing, and I want you to tell me about, bobsledding, anything that was extreme. And I would recommend saying you can't do round the world sailing and skateboarding. They're extreme in a dictionary sense, but they're not the same thing. Yeah. And that became the template. I actually did a TV show called Extreme Games 101 that was about the Extreme Games before it existed. We just took footage from different places and created a half-hour show. It was a preview for an event that didn't exist yet. And that became the X Games. And then later, at that point, I got involved in snowboarding. I ran a tour called the Freeride Snowboard Championships. It was the first major snowboarding tour, kind of ahead of its time in some respects, in partnership with ESPN. And that then led to, when I was in the snowboarding world and working with video action sports, I saw the video Crusty Demons of Dirt, the original motocross freestyle video, which kind of threw the whole world upside down because it was the first time motorsports crossed over into action sports. It used to be surfers were like, it has a motor, it's polluting, it's bad, and Supercross as a sport was very stodgy, even to this day, because it's driven by the Japanese manufacturers. Motorcycles coming out of have a bad reputation in America, in the sense it's the wild ones, the Hells Angels. The motorcycle industry has always tried to be very buttoned up. They used to make the guys in the pits wear white at dirt events because they didn't want black there. They didn't want motorcycle guys there. But crazy. But it was wild. But so freestyle came along, and immediately I said, this is really interesting. All the athletes, the snowboarders, the skateboarders, everybody was talking about Crusty Demons. The number of videos being sold was unbelievable. So I contacted ESPN, and because I knew these people, obviously having worked with them, and I produced different shows for them that were different types of things. And I said, this is the future of the sport. Now, by this point, the X Games existed. I think it was 96, 97. And I said, we should do this event about guys doing tricks on motorcycles. And I had a partner, I had a financial backer. And they said, we'll call you back. And they called back and said, absolutely not. We have no interest. We spoke to the AMA, and they said this freestyle thing is terrible, and these are horrible people, and the sport will never progress. So the answer is no. Well, I had some leverage and partners, and they allowed us to do 1 half-hour show. So in October of 1998, we ran the Freeride Motocross Championships, an extension, branding wise in my feeble brain at the time, of the snowboarding series, with this vision I had of doing all these sports. Mm-hmm. We ran this event in October of 98, sold out Orange County Speedway. It was in wooden ramps, and we made up the rules as we were going along. And in March of 1999, they aired it on ESPN2. And I called up a couple days later, how are the ratings? How was the show? And the guys on the other end of the line says, I've been instructed to read something to you. Very formal, made me nervous. What is he? Someone's reading me something? And he goes, I am not allowed to disclose any information to you. We will be in touch shortly. And I have to hang up now. The guy hangs up. And I'm like, oh my God, maybe a music wasn't cleared, or it sounded really legal. And then 2 days later, he calls me, "Hey, Paul, how you doing?" Like he's my best friend. Well, the show got such high ratings, they didn't know what to do with it. So they reran it a few times, saw that it continued to do better than anything they'd ever seen in action sports, and said, "Can you bring this to the pier in San Francisco at the X Games?" About 3 months later, which we were able to do. So that's how we brought the sport of freestyle motocross to the X Games. It became the highest rated thing at the X Games. It's still obviously a foundational element. And so I got involved, and I used to think live events was, well, what do? You put up a start and a finish, and it's easy, having no idea of how hard it was. And that led to running for many years a tour and investors and qualifying tours and being a promoter, as well as making the content about the shows. Now, I hired a company named Dynacom, which was a big company in the old days that did this stuff. So that's how, I got involved with the X Games. And then for 16 years, grew everything with two wheels at the X Games and was involved with that.
And so between the time, like between the actual live events, were you then producing content around sort of moto and all the different sports?
I wasn't producing too much content. Now, my background as a storyteller, as a professional writer at the time, I was very involved in working with the TV people with the storylines. Here's Travis Pastrana versus Brian Deegan. And it was a more active role than the other, what they call sport organizer, because that's just my nature, and I gravitated to those people. But separately, I was still doing entertainment stuff, and I was doing fact-based TV movies. I did about a handful of like actual NBC ripped from the headlines, full dramatic network television movies. And I did a number of those until when reality television came along, the world of fact-based TV movies kind of went away from a business dynamic. And so I was still doing content stuff like that. I was still writing occasionally. I was making some videos. But as I went along, I always wanted to do more in the content area. And then eventually I began transitioning away from, staging events to covering them, which is much more gratifying in a lot of ways. Plus, you don't have to stand on the dirt and move mud and so on.
And what was your first sort of like content creation piece after that?
I'm trying to think. I started making, Monster has been a big part of my life since around 2006, when I worked with Mike Metzger, who was obviously a freestyle guy. And ESPN came to me and said, could we recreate Evel Knievel's jump at Caesar's Palace Fountain? And they were like, we know you can't because the facility is not the same there anymore. But could you? But Paramount was releasing a Mission Impossible movie. They called it The Impossible Jump. So I went to Caesar's, figured out a way to reconfigure the venue to allow this jump to take place, even though it was very different from the way it was set up in Evel's day. And so I got involved in the content side, met the people from Monster. Monster was a turning point in their company because even though Mission Impossible was the sponsor of the event, Mike was the star, and Mike had a giant M claw on him. And it appeared to be a Monster event, much, much more than Mission Impossible, who just had some branding. So that led to that. And then I started making videos for them and working for different channels and, TV shows, and just started making content.
And did you sort of get into like, did you start writing or anything like that? Did you kind of?
Well, I used writing as a tool to do video production. I was writing proposals, and then in making the videos, and this is kind of what I think differentiates my work from some of the other people out there, is because I have a writing background, I think structure, drama, character, story, not just action. And that sort of has elevated what I've done because I have, I think, a literary background, a story background, a structural background. So that's how it came about.
And then like so going into so looking at Hawaiian, for example, was that obviously it's taking that storytelling and also going through the whole sort of interview process. Were you doing both? Were you the production side of that, or was that sort of...
The way Hawaiian came about was I was approached previous to Hawaiian by a director who wanted to do a movie about MotoGP. And it was actually the person that's 46 here, Valentino Rossi, who I've become a fan of. He was a monster athlete, and it was a director named Mark Neal. He had done other things, and we wanted to do this documentary. So I went to Monster, and it was funded, and we did a feature documentary called Fastest. Still successful, still out in the marketplace today. Global TV, it's continued to do well because Valentino is such an icon. I don't know if you're a fan of MotoGP. It's not, this year is a little bit of a embarrassing finale to his life. Excuse me. So I'm friends with Sam George and Stacy Peralta, Sam having been the editor of Surfer Magazine for many, many years. One of the other events I did, by the way, again, a perfect example. I think I was writing for Surfer, and they said, this is around 2000. So again, I've been around this game a little while. And OP, the brand OP, the old Ocean Pacific, wanted to do a surf event. Surfer Magazine said, "You have any ideas?" And this was the birth. The Mentawais were just blowing up. The boat trip was an exotic thing. I came up with an idea and said, "What if we did a contest on boats?" The guys lived on the boats. They lived together, so you get human interaction. And the contest takes place over 2 weeks, and we just travel around on boats throughout the islands and have like a multi-part series. And OP loved the idea. Surfer Magazine loved the idea. OP used to have a big event at Huntington Beach. There was a riot. They couldn't do that anymore. They wanted to reinvent their brand and give it authenticity. So it was a story. The Mentawais were exotic. Guys were going to live together and battle each other during the day, but at night they'd have to be living together, guys and girls. We had both men and women in the contest. So they said, "Okay, Paul, great. Here's excuse me, my nose is kind of itchy this morning. How do we do this?" Which then led to me, going to Indonesia, meeting with the Indonesian government, getting a gunboat to help us out. They were so nervous, getting the permits, and then organizing 5 boats to travel through the Mentawais with 15 surfers, full video crew, full media. We had reporters from GQ and Sports Illustrated came on the boats. And we ran a contest called the OP Pro Boat Trip Challenge, which went on for 2 years in the Mentawais. So I had done that kind of organization. And then, of course, I had to make a TV show out of it. We made one for USA Network and one for Fuel TV, actually, the early days of Fuel.
And was that before like any of the chartered boats or anything like that?
There were charter boats. They were out there. That's what we did is we used existing charters. Okay. But it was still early. It wasn't like it is today. Okay. Finding 5 boats. We had a boat drop out at the last minute. And I remember walking through the Padang Harbor, just looking for a boat. We needed one more boat. And like going up to captains, they had no idea what we were talking about. And then we had to pay off local officials. And one guy demanded $100 bills only for his payoff. So he wanted $100 bills, which we gave him. And he was the chief, the Bupati of a village out in the Mentawais. And then later, when the guy thought about it and realized $1,000, the shakedown was too little, when we got back to Padang at the end, they tried to kidnap us and take our passports and hold us hostage for like $10,000. And we literally had to escape out of a meeting, jump into a van, got chased through the streets of Padang, and then went to the airport to get through customs the night before our flight and sat in the airport to be safe. Otherwise, he said, "You're not going to be safe in the town." So things it was a little bit of an adventure. And we did a couple of TV shows out of it. And also my background is I quit college at one point and spent a year hitchhiking through Africa. So I started traveling pretty young, spent a year from Morocco, ended up in Mauritius, way pre the black shorts and all that. Madagascar, went across the desert, Central Africa. Just as a funny story, driving across Sahara Desert, I'm heading south, and you would sit on the top of your truck and look for dust in the opposite direction because that would tell you there's no roads and you'd see someone coming. So I see a car. I'm in the binoculars. He's got a surfboard on the top of his car. I have a surfboard on top of my car. And we stop in the middle of the Sahara Desert to talk, where have you been surfing? And I had been in Morocco. And he told me about this place called Mauritius. And that's where I ended up going. And the funny story was we wrecked our Jeep in Central Africa. And I thought, I had to hitchhike them. So how am I going to get my board to Kenya, which is where I was heading? And I found a truck with some tourists. And I said, "Take my board to Nairobi and I'll give you my tape deck and I'll give you some stuff I no longer needed." 4 months later, I show up in Nairobi, go to the American Embassy, and there's a lady there with a beehive hairdo and glasses with, rhinestones on it. And I said, "Do you happen to have a surfboard here?" And she goes, "Yes, it's in the broom closet." And there sitting in the broom closet was my surfboard. And I picked it up and then got on a freighter and went out to Mauritius. So anyway, crazy
That's
story.
Crazy. Were you on your own traveling around Africa, or?
I started out with a couple of guys. I wanted to get to the surf, and they wanted to go to Rhodesia and see the waterfall. So in Bangui, Central African Republic, we split up. I got in a dugout canoe with 2 other guys, went down the Ubangi River, and then hitchhiked across Zaire, Rwanda, Kenya, and then got on the freighter to Madagascar and Mauritius. So about a year I was traveling.
Nice.
It was a good trip. It kind of opened my mind.
Yeah, and then like seeing that back then, did that sort of then make you think, there's all these places and there's all these I guess all these locations where there's these incredible stories taking place, not necessarily just for action sports, but just in general, right? Then you can think this is something that we can kind of, showcase.
The real impact was I grew up in a very traditional, like I said, Long Island Jewish family where there was a path laid out. You're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a stockbroker, or you're going to end up in the garment district. And going to Africa at a relatively young age for that long time, it made me realize the choices you have in life and what people consider impossible is a narrow way to look at the world. Anything. I mean, here I found myself traveling through Africa, surfing perfect waves, all over the world, and never seemed possible. So it just made me think, no matter, like when I came up with this idea for the X Games and said, hey, why don't we bring these sports together and create an Olympics of action sports, or extreme sports at the time? I think it was my ability to try to see as broad a picture as possible that came from that experience. And you also learn, and there were some hard moments there. There were guns pointed at you. There were wrecks and jeeps. There were, I got cornered by some baboons in the jungle one time. It was very scary. Once you've done a lot of that and then someone yells at you or there's problems, you're like, I've seen worse than this. I'll be fine. So it was a great experience for me.
And then like when you got back and sort of well, I guess taking that confidence sort of back with you, I mean, did you was there any kind of, did you have an idea of where you wanted to be sort of going forward? You wanted to make like Val, for example, or like those kind of films. Did you ever think that would?
I mean, it didn't. The confession I can have to make is I've never had a plan. I've never looked forward. It's been just sort of one opportunistic thing after another, which has led me to, it's worked out. But I never really was a thinker in terms of strategically. But I went from writing and that foundation. So you ask about Hawaiian. I'd worked in the surfing world. I had done Fastest. Mm-hmm. And Sam and Stacy said, there's this guy, Eddie Aikau. I knew the story a little bit. Stacy actually was sort of skeptical at first, thinking, and he had done Dogtown, obviously, a great filmmaker. And he was like, well, I don't know, is there really a story here? What's the story? He was a little skeptical, but Sam had been talking to Quicksilver. And this was the days when other different big wave contests were popping up and things were going on. And Quicksilver felt that Eddie was getting overshadowed, as well as the theme of Eddie Aikau. There was a lot of localism issues and North Shore issues and just, some of the more sensitive topics in the surfing world. And Quicksilver wanted to find a way, and this is really kind of where this phase of my career began. How do we as a corporation tell a story in the proper way? Well, I had done a feature documentary with Fastest. I had gotten global distribution once it was financed and finished. And so that gave me credibility to say to Quicksilver, if you give me the money for this, between Stacy, Sam, and myself, we'll find distribution. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I had done it successfully. They wanted to tell the Eddie story. They wanted the Eddie contest to be elevated. Bob McKnight, to his credit, goes, this is important. We should do this. Now, this was really before the crash of the full surf industry. There was a lot more money. Stocks were still going up and people were kind of a little more frothy about things. And so we started the process with a small budget. And then because of my relationship with ESPN, I went to 30 for 30. People over there who are very picky. They're very, they say they get 300 or 400 pitches a year to make 6 movies. So it's not an easy sell to them. But this really appealed to them because they had covered ABC, which is ESPN is the same company. They had covered Wide World of Sports, had covered Sunset Beach and Haleiwa, and they knew about surfing and they had covered Eddie's disappearance. So they knew about the story sort of from a corporate standpoint. And they said, this is part of our history. Yes. And as a cultural story, as you know, I don't know if you've seen Hawaiian. And they said, let's do it. So they jumped in, gave us more money. Quicksilver stepped up. The biggest challenge was there was a bunch of Australians running, very involved in marketing at Quicksilver. And they go, you got to talk about the contest and what Quicksilver has done. And I had learned from Fastest, put the corporation in the background, and then you'll be able, if you get people to care about the story, they will care about the brand. The brand is not the story. And Bob McKnight got it. He supported us. So if you see Hawaiian, at the very end, it references a contest takes place. But we said, look, if you believe in Eddie, you'll want to know about the contest. We're telling Eddie's story, Hawaiian story. And it became, and once we got there, these people were dying to tell the story. And we originally thought it was really going to be about the incident in Sean Thompson's movie about how Eddie saved Rabbit and Ian and, you know, the conflict in the 70s. But it really turned into a much, much bigger story about Hawaiian history, Hawaiian culture, the appropriation of Hawaiian culture, how all that happened, you know, the overthrow of the government, and Clyde Aikau talking very emotionally about walking on the beach at Waikiki and not being allowed to go in the hotels because he was dark-skinned. And that's what the movie's really about. And it's about Eddie's quest for his identity. And that's when I learned, when you make one of these movies, it's about a theme that the sport is just a vehicle for the story. Yeah. It's not a surfing story. This is a personal story of a guy looking for who he is. And it's a story about Hawaii. That's why we called it Hawaiian. And it was his quest. And the context is him bringing back Hawaiian culture as a cultural figure. And then within that, you tell the human story.
And does the story change, like when you initially sort of research it and sort of look into these projects, and then you dig a bit deeper? Is it sometimes the case that, you know, when you start like speaking to these people, like finding out about like more like what's going on, does it then it alters the storyline a bit?
Yeah, what you always do is you come up with what you think is your vision. And now I've done enough of these, I realize, and I'm very relaxed about it. Here's what I think my movie is. And then you go do your story, and then the movie actually reveals itself to you. Yeah. So we thought this was going to be a story about Australians versus Hawaiians and how Eddie stood up for the spirit of aloha. And it turned into be a much bigger one. And it reveals, so you sort of, it's like you start with a plan and you see where it takes you. You can't just do it randomly. You have to try to have a vision, and then you adapt to what people tell you, what you see, what you hear. So it does evolve very much. I'm in the middle of doing a new one now, and, you know, we're plodding along, and it's already going through some great changes from where we started out. And this is about Supercross.
Oh, okay. What's that going to be about?
It's called Paydirt, the Untold Story of Supercross. And it's about how this sport, which has now become quite big, you know, where it came from. It has an unusual origin story that involves a horrible murder. And so it's very exciting. We're very thrilled to have it. We're going to do it as a big recreation. And it's a story of the racers, the key races, the key moments. And in this case, there's been different promoters who have really shaped the sport. So we're using that as part of the structure of the story, as well as the story of the human stories, the key moments. It won't, like in the other movie I made called Unchained, which was about freestyle motocross, we're not telling you definitive history. I mean, I learned this from Stacy Peralta. When you look at Riding Giants, which people call the history of big wave surfing, it is not the history of big wave surfing. In fact, one of the hurdles we had with the Aikau family is that Eddie is not in Riding Giants. And Stacy picked a few stories to tell a bigger story. And that's what we're doing in this movie, is we're telling a few stories. There's probably been 20 different champions over the years. We're not telling each story. We're not an encyclopedia. We're a movie. So you have to approach it that way.
And were people sort of getting upset about that? I mean, if they're like, look, you didn't mention, if it was an athlete, you didn't mention me, or like you said, like Eddie's family getting involved, and it would ruffle a few feathers, right? And
it does. You have to just tell people, I never said I was doing the history. I'm telling the story of Supercross. So if 3 different people in Supercross, for example, had a career-ending injury at some point, do I tell that 3 times, the idea that the sport is dangerous and in a blink of an eye you can lose your career? You tell that story from the one person whose story is the best to illuminate that concept. And then again, this happened again. I don't want to see it again. I now emotionally have gone through that roller coaster as a viewer. I don't want to go through it 3 more times. I want another story. So you're not. It's not the definitive history. It's not like Ken Burns when he does the Civil War. He does the Civil War. That's not what these features. They're more movie-like than they are history-like. At least that's my approach.
And how, like what's been the inspiration with your style sort of over the years? Is it, would you say, like, you know, has there been any kind of core, like, obviously with the storytelling, like you mentioned, but has there been like any core sort of themes? Or
I think the core theme is finding the theme for each story. So in Unchained, which also happened to win an Emmy Award as the best sports film of the year, people think Freestyle, outside of our world, they think these guys are crazy. They're daredevils and they're nuts. They just hurl themselves wildly in the air. Well, it's not the case. So the idea was to show the human side of the athletes. And the idea was to come up, and the theme was, you know, if you fall down, you get back up. As simple as that is. I always believe in finding the one thing that is your whole story. You know, Eddie Aikau's story was search for identity, which reflected on his Hawaiian identity. You know, he grew up in the 50s and 60s when the culture in Hawaii was forget your Hawaiianness. We're going to make you American. That was what was happening in Hawaii. The culture was subjugated, the language, the sport of surfing. Mm-hmm. And so he was lost. And really, it's a guy trying to find himself, which leads him from going from being a surfer to a lifeguard to eventually getting on the boat, which represents, you know, capturing Hawaiian history. So once you get that, once you find that nugget, the heart of your story, then you build everything around it.
And like, sort of going from that and then actually making the production, what would be like what are some of the biggest challenges there? Is it sort of looking at like getting funding? And
I was going to ask you, do you have some money for investing? Because I'm always looking for another investor. Yeah, finding the money is always the hardest thing. And a lot of people I talk to, and I have people saying, Paul, how is it you're doing these? And how come I'm not doing these? Yeah. And because it's unfortunate, but there's probably a number of talented people, quite a few, who could do what I do in the creative end. But you also have to be a businessman. You have to be able to create a proposal. You have to have a, you know, credibility. You have to then manage hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, for example, in the Eddie movie, the last shot of the movie is Eddie paddling off into oblivion. And we looked at how do we do this shot the best. And as the producer side of me was, well, we'll just get a guy standing on a boat with a camera and we'll watch him paddle off. And then I thought, you know, it would look a lot better from a helicopter and have the helicopter pull up and up and up, and then he disappears into the white caps. But that's $10,000. So is it worth that money for that shot? You have to balance it. And it was. When we did Unchained, I went through 3 different editors because I wasn't satisfied. And I've always felt, spend the money on quality, it will come back to you. And with Unchained, I had people go, oh, it's good enough. You know, some of the investors like, you're going to spend more money or you need more money. And I almost never go back for more money. I take it out of my own pocket if I'm not happy with the final product. And I'm usually good about a budget that makes sense, that I'm comfortable with. But I will spend, you know, the profit end of the deal to make sure the product is what it should be. And it always pays off. So with Unchained, we went through a number of editors and it got better. And it became, you know, in its world, it's the definitive piece. It won the first of the 2 Emmy Awards that I won, or the second, actually, I'm sorry. Hawaiian also won an Emmy Award. So it pays off. And it's also just how I'm built. You know, I can't help myself. Sometimes my wife will go, have we spent enough yet? And I'm like, no, I need more. We need another shot. And you have to, and it's balancing it. So you need both skills. And then you have to creatively be able to execute and get the trust of people. And the other skill I have is interviewing. You know, I have a style and getting people. I'm sort of famous for making people cry, actually. I'm not quite sure why. I once had someone who have to remain nameless where I did a video for Monster with a husband and wife team. And the husband was the athlete, and they were in their 30s, and they didn't have children. So I asked this question, you know, you're in your mid-30s, you don't have kids. Do you regret, or has it been hard? And she starts crying hysterically, because she really wanted to have kids, and the husband didn't want to have him yet because he was still wanted to continue his career. And later she was like so mad that she had revealed this on camera. So that happens.
You would almost turn into a counselor then instead of doing the interview, right?
Well, many times it's what you say. I've had many people say, Paul, it felt like a therapy session. Michael Waltrip in the more recent movie called Blink of an Eye, which has a new life coming, which I can tell you about with Sony Pictures. We have an Academy Award winning director coming on to make it into a feature film.
Nice.
It was the same thing, very emotional. We had people on the Eddie movie thanking me, saying it was like going to church to finally talk about Eddie, their experience. Now, with Eddie, we were really nervous. Like, what if he really wasn't this really good guy? You know what I mean? Like, you go into this, you never really know what you're going to find. But It was so wonderful. He was as advertised. Certainly there were some human things that weren't relevant to the story, but he was really who he was. And I've also found, by the way, the key to these stories is women. That the wives and girlfriends are the key to making it. Look at Free Solo, which is, the pinnacle. Mm-hmm. The movie succeeds not just because Alex Honnold does what he does, but it's his girlfriend that we see everything through. Her emotional world makes that movie work because he's fairly automaton, whatever, he's, whatever he is, he's not, because the athlete has to, I think, in some ways, restrict their view of their own accomplishment. And they also spend their lives in a physical world, not in a mental world, and not in an emotional world. An athlete has to control their emotions, put fear aside, have a certain blindness to the dangers. They have to just do what they do. But the wives, mothers, girlfriends, they approach it emotionally, and they bring you. I've always found women to be the key to my documentaries.
Do you think that's because they sort of would then open up, or that they're more inclined to just be emotional and tell, I don't know, some truths, whereas some of the athletes maybe they would be like keep a guard up, and they'd be harder to kind of crack maybe.
It is, and it's also part of, like I said, particularly like in freestyle motocross. If you think too much about a sport where you're very likely you will be getting hurt at some point very, very badly, and possibly die and possibly be paralyzed, you can't be a deeply introspective person. You have to be a person who lives in the moment. You have to be a person of the present to do those sports. If you're a person whose mind wanders and you're, a deep, thoughtful person. I mean, Richard Petty, who I was working with a couple projects on that didn't come to fruition, he said that the key to his driving and why he was a terrible husband and father, which was his words, was I had to live in the present for myself. And I couldn't just do it on the racetrack and then turn it off in the real world. Because if I started worrying about my kids and worrying about my wife, and I just got, all it is about me and being totally present. And he goes, as his career was ending, he goes, I'd find myself driving and thinking about other things. And he goes, I knew it was time to get out of the race car. I started caring more about my kids and my family and my life. That's not how you win races. He goes, you just got to, and I once asked him about a big crash. He's had the famous crash in Daytona where he spun like 7 times down the front stretch. And I said, how do you get back in the car? And he goes, you can't change the past. You don't know what's going to happen in the future. So be in the present. Don't worry about anything. And that was his philosophy. But as he got older, he started worrying about things and thinking about the past and thinking about his retirement. And then he couldn't drive anymore. So whereas the wives approach things completely different. They're on the sidelines. They're observers by nature because they're not the participant. And so I wouldn't say they're more emotional. I would just say they bring another point of view. Yeah. And it tends to be richer and more nuanced than the actual participant. And together it works great when you bring like Travis Pastrana's mom in Unchained. Like you see Travis there being interviewed about the double backflip. So he survived, but the technique is bring you back to the moment as if it's real. We don't talk in the past tense. It's kind of in the present tense. So you re-experience what's going on. So in Unchained, Travis is talking about, I was nervous about the trick. I was getting ready. You build anticipation the way you build a scene in a movie. Mm-hmm. And then Travis's mother, even though she's speaking in the past tense, feels it in the present going, I didn't know if I would ever see my child again when he rolled out onto that floor. That's emotional. A mother saying, she goes, I hugged my son goodbye, thinking I'd never see him again. So now you're emotionally invested. Again, he's talking, he's not dead, but at that moment, and then everybody talks about it and you relive it. So the technique, and I learned it a lot from watching Stacy Peralta's movies, is to make it feel in the present, bring the moment back. And that's kind of the difference between a feature documentary and like a TV recap of something, is I want you to experience it. So like in Blink of an Eye, you go through Michael Waltrip's emotional roller coaster of what he went through, of a guy who lost 462 races in a row, the worst guy in the history of the sport, getting taken under the wing by Dale Earnhardt, the meanest, toughest, best driver arguably in the history of the sport and in all racing. And that odd friendship, it's really a friendship story. And then, you know, the emotion of finally winning a race, and his friend gave up his life to do that. So you're there in the present and relive it with him.
Nice. And like speaking to all these people within action sports and sort of athletes, what do you think the sort of commonality is between between the different sports?
It's a very interesting question. I'd have to think about that. The commonality, I would say it's focus and determination at a very high level, that they all, the ones from Travis to Michael to Dale Earnhardt, it's tremendous confidence and belief in oneself. There's an audaciousness. I think that's why we're drawn to them, to say, I can be this special person and that I need to prove this to people. I guess as I'm thinking about it, there's almost a needy quality. Like these guys are driven. What drives them? I think they want validation. There's a need for thrills. They're sort of on that distal end of the human experience, and that's why we relate to them. I mean, think about walking into a boxing arena, or, you know, putting on your helmet to go race in the Daytona 500. You're not only racing, there's 250,000 people there. There's an audaciousness about them that is captivating.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's like, I mean, that crosses over. I don't know. I was watching Untold recently, the documentary sort of
the great
series, and just watched the tennis one with Andy Ruddock and Fish, and sort of seeing that, like, you know, it just crosses across all these sports, right? When sort of, it doesn't matter, like when it's at that high level, and then you're going into these arenas in front of these crowds.
I mean, I got started with Valentino Rossi, and I knew nothing about MotoGP. Now I'm a fanatical fan. And you know what he does at 200 miles an hour. And I think people, when you see these people do what they do at their level, their risk, it makes you able to live your better life. Because if he can get up, if he can come back, if he can deal with the pressure, you have a visceral experience with them, and you're able to then say, well, I'm going to try today. I mean, with Unchained, I've had a lot of people say it really helped them. Hey, if those guy can break his body and do this and do that and then get back on the bike, you know, it's sort of an undercurrent theme. I can do it in my life. Yeah. So that's what I hope to achieve, is inspire people. And
that could be anything, just from like, you know, like making a certain decision, or if you're being uncertain, or like you can use it for everything, right?
Exactly. And this is just we all live in our own lives very dramatic, on the edge things. And when you see someone, I think, you know, at this, you know, sort of pinnacle where the stakes are truly high, it helps you, inspire you to do more in your own life.
Yeah.
So, you know, Eddie went on a quest. He gave up his life to help his fellow man. We're all not going to be in that situation on a boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but we'll be in some version of that in our own lives. And it helps to see what these people do. And I guess there's a certain part that it's a mystery. You know, art doesn't have a definitive answer. If you tell a true story and show what people do, it just somehow intrinsically inspires people. I don't quite know.
And now, I guess, with all the sort of multiple distribution channels and social media and everything, like the whole landscape changing, I mean, how's that been? And like, what do you kind of see the opportunities with that?
I think it's very important for me anyways, you know, to always stay ahead of things. Like for a while, everybody thought, including me, that 360 was going to be the new thing, you know, the VR. And it was kind of funny. So I got Ferrari, who I also work with, which is a completely different culture and brand. Super fun. I love working for Ferrari. Made about a half a dozen videos for them. we got them to get the Ozo camera and do a big shoot with their cars. And we came up with this great footage. It was super exciting, super fun, 360 degrees. And then I brought it to Monster and I said, guys, you got to put on the headset and experience what 360 is, because it'll work for our world. And it made Mark Hall, who was sort of my rabbi at Monster, the head guy who created the brand, the smartest guy I know, he got nauseous for like 4 hours and was so mad at me that I had made him watch this 5-minute video. And I said, these guys have a problem. If your process makes people sick. And they kept saying, don't worry, we'll solve that in the future. They've never solved it. And it also turned out that 360 video takes away the director and the point of view. Everything is included. There's no decision making. So I think it has a place. I think whether it's technical, there's certain experiences, certainly maybe in the medical field, but ultimately in storytelling, if you don't have a point of view, why am I listening to you? So you want the director and producers, and 360 takes it away because it's an all-seeing eye. So, but certainly streaming has changed. I'm now working, as you know, with Twitch, which is a whole new platform for me. Very interesting thing. My latest surf movie called Groundswell: Epic Tales of Monster Waves. That's been interesting because I've multi-platformed the original content. COVID has forced a lot of people to adapt. Yeah. Originally, this big wave thing was, we did an expression session at Poena Point with half a dozen guys to show toe surfing. This is about 2 years ago now. The progression of toe surfing, its place in the world of surfing. We were going to do that again at Jaws. We had the surfers, we had the permits, no small matter, by the way, but we got all that lined up for Jaws, and then COVID hit. So we had to pivot, and we pivoted to getting footage from the greatest sessions of last winter. Okay. And there was a lot. So we couldn't go to Nazaré when it was that giant day at 70 or 80 feet. But I had crews who were there. Then I went back and did it with interviews and built stories around half a dozen surfers and their quests for each winter. And I'm happy to send you links to everything.
Amazing.
What?
He won't wait for you.
Okay, just go.
No.
Who? What?
Your surfboard guy. He's going to leave. He said if you don't get there by 10:30 with $200, he's just leaving.
Okay.
So you have to call him.
Okay. I can't. The surfboard ding repair guy, I told you.
We should tell him about before. He's
just calling me going, you have to get here right now. So I said, I'd have to wait a half hour. So I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. So we retrofitted it, and then we had so much footage. There was so many great sessions. It was just extraordinary winter, arguably the best winter in big wave surfing history. We did a 20-minute version for Outside TV. Then we did 5 one-minute pieces on 5 individual rides called One Wave Stories that also went on Outside. Then it became a 47-minute show for ABC under World of X Games, where we expanded it. So we did a 20-minute one, a series of individual ones. Then we took the whole thing, tore it apart, rebuilt it as a feature documentary, did a new VO, a new structure, and that's now currently being shopped as this new, full story. And it will probably end up on whether it's Tubi TV or HBO or one of the different channels. So multi-platforming these things is kind of the way to go with this stuff. And you have to be open to the new platforms that are coming along. Many of my shows have ended up on the Pluto TVs of the world. Now you have the AVODs have come along, which are kind of funny because it's going back to the old model of advertising-driven content, which is what network TV was. So everything has been repurposed in this world of, commercial breaks. And I'm working on some other initiatives in that area. So there's a lot of platforms. You have to be very flexible. Sometimes I do a lot of stuff for Monster, and it's just for Monster. But so Blink of an Eye started out as a feature documentary. There was for the brand, it was very helpful. We did a lot of short pieces that came out of it. So Monster could enhance the message on their own channels. Then it got picked up by Sony, and I made a movie going back to my world as a fact-based TV producer. I did a movie called The Vow with Rachel McAdams and Channing Tatum, which did about $200 million at the box office. It was a big hit. And the producer I worked with there named Roger Birnbaum, who has made about 125 feature films, from James Bond movies to The Sixth Sense and on and on and on, like a real. His gross money is somewhere north of 500. He's the top 5 producers in the history of Hollywood, and Val being one of the many he's made. So he loved Blink of an Eye. We took it to Sony, and now we have a full script. It's wonderful, and we're negotiating with an Academy Award winning director who will hopefully turn into a big feature film. So you have to be you have to be open. The JB Mooney, I did a mini documentary, did very well. And now we're talking also about a feature film or a feature documentary. Just as an aside, tonight at the International Motorsports Awards, which is a festival of the best and really good. There's a lot of movie festivals out there, and some of them are frankly a little rinky-dinky. This is a really big one, and they combined 2020 and 2021 into one awards. I was supposed to go to London, but this is not a good time to travel. But tonight we're up for 3 different awards at the International Motorsports Awards, so we'll see what happens.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, good luck with that. And then, what any other new projects coming out for Twitch Productions? Are you kind of doing anything with?
We are. There is. I can't announce anything yet because we're finalizing things. But Twitch is an interesting platform. They're very successful. They are very big. They have a lot of money. They're a gaming platform, obviously, and that's what we're doing with Monster. I'm doing a series called Live and Unleashed with the Dingo, where we take video games, Monster athletes, non-Monster athletes, have a good time, play video games. And we've learned very clearly people are interested, not so much the technical aspect of a video game. They're interested in the interaction between people as they play video games. We had Tony Hawk, Nigel Houston, Daniel Cormier, a lot of different people. So we're doing that, but Twitch wants to expand. And so we have a major, hopefully soon to announce big wave event that we'll be doing. It's a whole new property. I can't say more than that, but Twitch is very interested in expanding. But it will really be an earthquake in the surfing world once every details come together. But still, some buttons are being buttoned up on that one. Have that. JB Mooney, the rodeo star, is someone else we're doing. My wife's handing me notes about the crazy ding repair guy who's insisting I show up in Topanga. Which I told him he'll have to wait a few minutes. That's the surfing life, you a lot of characters involved. So we just, got a lot of different projects. I probably have a slate of 20 different things we're working on. It's funny, you go through a file and you see an idea you had 10 years ago, and sometimes they come back. And in terms of anybody who wants to get in the business, we talked a little bit about that. You have to have a thick skin. You can't get too wedded to any one project. You have to put everything you have into it. And, someone once said to me, when you go to corporations for money, and even to networks, the Netflix of the world, an executive can only get fired when he says yes, pretty much. So nobody likes to say yes. No is like really easy because you can't get in trouble. You can't lose your job if you say no. You can lose your job when you say yes and something goes wrong. So yes has to you're really giving people a comfort level in your ability to execute, that you're the right person, you create a vision, that you're good to work with, you're not going to squander the money. You have to make the client have whatever level really believe in you, which is, you can't fake it. You have to be it. Yeah. But the flip side is, you're going to pitch a lot of things and a lot of stuff's going to be no. No is just part of the world. And almost no matter how much success you have, occasionally the phone rings, but I'm still hustling. I still have to call people, having a track record helps. But it's really more about you're still dialing more than answering the phone. Yeah. So it's diligence and it's finding good stories. Blink of an eye. I've said it many times. I was handed a home run. I had to run the bases. The story was amazing. So and if you do this now, someone came to me with a great story about Indonesian drug smuggling based on a documentary. But the story, while it's fascinating, is not really developed. So we've been spending, I've spent over a year now doing what turns out is really hard, creating an entire fictional world that could live over 6 to 8 hours. That is a really, really, really hard thing to do. Yeah. And it's been fun to work on it. But, but if you're in the fact-based world like I am, if you have a good story, things fall into place. But you got to just plug away. But it all comes back to, what is your theme? What do people care about? And I've always said, people care about people. They do not care about accomplishments or events. It's the people that people watch. I mean, professional sports is basically a soap opera, right? What week, who won, who lost, who's crying. It's very Shakespearean. Don't get caught up in the event. It's really the human drama. And why the NFL, for all its brutality and the fake warmongering and everything. It's really about, hey, I like Tom Brady, I hate Tom Brady, right? It becomes very personal. And as a filmmaker, if you keep that in mind, not like, wow, the game was exciting,